Welcome to yet another lecture. Hopefully, this is going to be our last lecture before our test series, our second test. And we'll be using the whole of next week and upper week to prepare for the test. And then on the 20th, we'll be writing the test on Moodle. I understand the fact that some of us are having challenge with data. I'm hopeful that we will make plans to have data for next week's test. So for that reason, I will not be too particular about attendance or not, especially for today's class and the likes. I understand that some of us don't have data, so I'll just go quickly to what we have to do today and then conclude the class as quick as possible. Okay. Last week we started the discussion on human security, and we try to differentiate, we discuss the whole idea around security. We say security is the freedom from threats, is the freedom from danger or the threats of danger itself. So we said it's the freedom from danger or the threat of danger, freedom from danger or the threat of danger. And we said that when it comes to the discourse of security in the international relations, international politics, in geopolitics, we said there are basically two views to it. We have the realist view and the liberal view to the perception of security. The realists believe that security is state-centric. So in that case, we are supposed to be concerned about the security of the state, the safety of the state, the ensuring that everything is towards the fact that the state is free from danger and free from the threats of danger itself. So that is the state-centric view. And under the state-centric view of security, we said the survival of the state is seen as the most important, not the survival of the individuals within the state. And then we also looked at the human security view of security, to say the human security view is the concern about individuals, the well-being of people. How do people survive? And we gave 7 dimensions to human security, from physical security to environmental security to water security to community security, political security and the likes, health security. All these things are some of the points in which we looked at last week. And then last week we ended with looking at the premises of different angles in which security of the world will be challenged. We looked at environmental security last week, and we talked about climate change, and then we talked about resources as a very fundamental issue that can affect the security of the world itself. And we say when we talk about climate change, the effects of climate change have the effects it goes beyond the boundaries of a particular state. So basically, these are the things in which we looked at when we talked about environmental security. So we said environmental security cuts beyond a single boundary. So the solutions to environmental security, ensuring that everybody is safe, is beyond the jurisdiction or the responsibility of one country or one state. Everybody needs to be involved in this action. So basically, these are some of the stuff we looked at last week. So today we want to continue on that premises of human security, and then today we want to talk about pandemics. We want to look at pandemics as another aspect that is quite interesting. And the situation in which we find ourselves now with the coronavirus saga makes this topic a very interesting topic for us to actually look into. So when we talk about pandemics, we're talking about pandemics as epidemics that has a worldwide coverage, that has a global coverage. So we said epidemics occurring worldwide or over a wide area, cutting across national boundary, is usually referred to as pandemic. If you have a particular epidemic that cut across national boundary, it has moved beyond just a particular state alone to have effects in a wide area, especially cutting across national boundary, is referred to as pandemic. And there's actually a difference between a pandemic, an epidemic, and an outbreak. An outbreak of disease is sudden, is in most cases is just a sudden rise in a particular case of disease in a particular area. For instance, now we can say we have a cholera outbreak. Like in some areas in South Africa, in Southern Africa, there was a time when we will talk about the fact that there was cholera outbreak. So it's just a particular area. It does not affect every other space. So we say that's an outbreak. Or we have a malaria outbreak. Or it's just a particular sickness that is peculiar to a particular group of people or particular to a particular space that is not widespread. We say that's an outbreak. If it is sudden and then people begin to die or people begin to contract those kind of disease, we say it is an outbreak. So an outbreak is a disease cases that is within a particular small area. It doesn't go beyond those areas. We say that is an outbreak. Then an outbreak becomes an epidemic when it becomes larger, when the effect becomes bigger, when the area span becomes wider. We say it becomes an epidemic. The effect is now seen that, okay, it is no longer a short death or small group of people that are being infected. It's becoming larger and larger and larger. So we say that is an epidemic. And then it becomes a pandemic when it has a global coverage. And if you are familiar with the whole cases around the coronavirus when it started when the world started talking about it in January of 2020, you realize that at a point they were like, oh, the United Nations is supposed to call it a pandemic. And the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization was supposed to tag the coronavirus, for instance, to be a pandemic. And they were like, no, it's not a pandemic, it's still an epidemic. The reason why they call it an epidemic was because they still felt it was just within China alone. You see, it was an outbreak. If you use the coronavirus as an example, it's a case in point here. As a case in point, it was an outbreak when it was just in Wuhan, China alone. When it was in Wuhan, it was an outbreak. That's okay. The wildlife market, there was an outbreak in Wuhan. People are dying of a particular disease. The disease is sudden, and people are dying of it. It was an outbreak at that point. And then you see, it moved away from being an outbreak. It increased its space to a large chunk of China. When it was the whole of China, it was still seen as an epidemic because the world is saying, no, it's just China alone. It does not have effects beyond China and everything. But when in March, that was in January, it was still an epidemic in January, February, they were still saying it's an epidemic and the likes. But in March, when it moved to Iran, it moved to Italy, there were traces of it in the United States. Then they're like, this has moved beyond China. It has moved to wider spaces in Asia. It has moved to Europe. It has moved to the United States, to North America. Then they were like, okay, this is now a pandemic. That was when it was now declared a pandemic. I think on the 20th of March 2020, it was now declared a pandemic because now it has a global coverage. So that's what we imply to when we talk about pandemics. Pandemics are cases of a particular disease that has global coverage, and the effects are felt in all space of the known world. Mark the word I said, known world, because by the time we start discussing the history of pandemics, you understand by what the correlation of saying the known world. So when it start affecting everywhere that way, it's referred to as pandemic. So when we discuss the history of pandemic, this diagram here is quite interesting, and we are just going to dwell on it quickly. We are going to dwell on it as quick as we can. So looking at it here, we said pandemics are prevalent over a whole country or the world itself. And then throughout history, there has been different kinds of pandemic. Coronavirus is not the first of the pandemics that has faced the world. The world has survived a whole lot of pandemics, and that is why I am certain that the world will also survive corona, and as it is. And talking about corona, in most cases, when we discuss it, we say, corona is big and everything. Yes, it is not the biggest of the pandemics that has affected the world, but it is the fastest of the pandemic that affected the world. Please take note of that. Corona is not the biggest of the pandemic that has affected the world, but it is the fastest of the pandemic that has affected the world. That is why the world is very particular about it. But throughout history, there's been a whole lot of pandemics that have affected the world. The first recorded pandemic was in 165 to 180 BC, right? It was referred to as the Antonio Plague. And then after the Antonio Plague, we have the plague of Justinian. We have the Japanese small plague in 735 to 737 BC. We had the Black Death in 1347 to 1351. We had the Black Death, and then we have the smallpox pandemic in 1952. And then also in the 17th century, we have the Great Plague in the 17th century, that is in 1600. And then in the 18th century, we also had, that's in 1700, we have the Great Plague, another Great Plague at that point. And then we have the cholera outbreak in 1817 to 1923. We have the Third Plague in 1855. We had the yellow fever plague pandemic in late 1800s. We had the Spanish flu in 1918 to 1919, the Spanish flu. And then we had the Russian flu in 1889 to about 1890. And then we had the HIV. HIV also was a pandemic. We had it it became prevalent in 1881. Till present, HIV is still a challenge with us, and we are still trying to live with it. We had the Asian flu in 1957. We had the Hong Kong flu in 1968. We had the MERS 2012 till present. We are still suffering from MERS. Is still ongoing. We have SARS in 2002. We had Ebola in 2014. We had the swine flu in 2009. And then we have, presently, we have the COVID-19, the coronavirus in 2020. These are different flus. These are different pandemics, sorry. These are different pandemics that have affected the world over time. Now, in this place now, I just want to discuss quickly the death tolls of this pandemic. So you see, the Antonine plague was believed to be caused by measles, and it's about 5 million people died. The Japanese flu, about 1 million people died. The plague of Justin, about 30 million to 50 million people died. Smallpox killed about 56 million. The Black Death killed about 200 million. The Great Plague of London killed about 100,000 people. The Italian plague killed about 1 million people. The cholera pandemics in the 1817 and 1923 killed about over 1 million people, and then on and on and on like that. These are different pandemics that have happened in the world, and the death tolls that came with it. Look at the yellow fever, for instance, killed about 100,000 people, right? And then you see HIV. For instance, HIV have killed so far between 25 to 35 million people. That's the number of deaths that we have on HIV, between 25 to 35 million people. While Ebola killed about 11,000 people. The present coronavirus that we are facing now has killed over 500,000. Over 500,000. As of yesterday, I was looking at it, it was about 580 something million. Sorry, 580 something thousand people. Is yet to kill up to 1 million people so far. So it's still developing. So that's the point. But the swiftness in its spread is what is the challenge presently with a pandemic like this. So basically these are. But when we talk about when you look at all these things now, these pandemics and the tools you have, it's interesting for us to look at it from, let's arrange it in chronological order on how it has affected the world and on the gravity of its effects when it was ravaging the world. So you see, we've been able to arrange it from the highest to the least. So if you look at this diagram now, what you have is the death tolls of this pandemic. The highest is the Black Death, which killed about 200 million people, while the least is SARS, and the SARS of 2002, which killed just 770 people. So you see, in the Black Death plague, it happened in 1947 to, sorry, it happened in 1347. The Black Death happened in 1347 and to about 1351. And the interesting thing about the Black Death is that it was believed that the disease originated from rats, and then it moved and then infected humans and all that. It's through fleas, flea infection and the likes. And the beauty of most of these pandemics is that there's always a cross-pollination. The disease moved from animals to humans. So the Black Death killed about 200 million people. And this is just estimates. We must take note that they are just estimates. They are plus minus the number of deaths that it's killed. But it killed about 200 million people. And it took the world. This is an interesting point about the Black Death, and it's quite fascinating for me when I was reading about it, that it took the world about 200 years to recover from the effects of the Black Death. Just the way we are saying that the coronavirus, for instance, has changed the world order. It has changed things in the world, and it's going to take us a long time to recover from it. The Black Death took the world 200 years, more than 200 years before the world was able to recover. Before there was a recovery, all right. Before there was the population recovery, it took the world that long. And then the next is the smallpox. The smallpox of 1920. It killed about 56 million people. That's the next. In 1920, it killed about 56 million people. It's estimated that about 90% of Native Americans, it's affected about 90% of Native Americans. It affected people in Europe in the 1800s, and it was believed that over 400,000 people were killed by smallpox yearly, annually. Over 400,000 people are being killed by it until the vaccination. And then next is the Spanish flu of 1918 to 1919. In most cases, when we talk about it is the Spanish flu that seems to be popular with the conspiracy theorists and the likes. When they say the world has experienced, every century the world experienced a particular pandemic or the other. The references have always been made to the Spanish flu. But the Spanish flu is not also that, the Spanish flu is just the third deadliest pandemic that has faced human history. It's killed between 40 to 50 million people. And then we also have the plague of Justinian. That killed about 30 to 50 million people as well. That happened in the 441 to 542 BC. That's when it happened. And it is believed that the Roman Empire collapsed because of this particular plague. That was part of the stuff that led to the collapse of the Roman Empire. We will discuss that again when we talk about the coronavirus proper. And then the next after that is HIV. HIV has killed between 25 to 35 million people, and is still affecting the world in present. We said that's killed about 25 to 35 million people. And then the next is the third plague of 1855, which killed about 12 million people. And then we had the Antonial plague, which killed about 5 million people. We have the 17th century Great Plague, which killed about 3 million people. Asian flu, is another popular one. It killed about 1.1 million people. The Russian flu killed about 1 million. The Hong Kong flu also killed about 1 million. The cholera outbreak also killed about 1 million. The Japanese smallpox epidemic also killed about 1 million. And then the 18th century Great Plague killed just about 600,000 people. And then the COVID-19 we're talking about is also around 600,000 presently as we speak. As of today, it's almost about 600,000, if not more, because as of yesterday when I was checking it, yesterday being the 5th of July 2020, it was already around 580, about 580 people. So I suppose that by as of this morning, it will be over 600 already. And then the swine flu, about 200,000 people. The yellow fever, about 150,000 people. Ebola killed only about 11,000 people. And then both SARS and MERS killed less than 1,000 people. But you see, when you look at these death tolls of pandemics in the world, the interesting thing about it is for us to concentrate on the COVID-19. You realize that COVID-19 is moving on a very fast pace. It's moving on a very fast pace. So if this diagram, we were to discuss it by next week, it is possible that we will say that it has killed more people than possibly the Japanese smallpox. The Japanese smallpox, the cholera outbreak, the Hong Kong flu, the Russian flu, and the Asian flu. The pace at which the COVID-19 is going in the next 1-2 months, it is possible that we talk about the fact that it has outsmarted all these people. It has outwilled them. Now, it's having the highest as it is. So you see, it is presently around 600,000. So if it is presently around 600,000, that implies that it will have been more than the 18th century plague of the 1700, because the 18th century plague of the 1700 affected only about 600,000 people. That was the rate. That was the rate of the pandemic. So basically, you discover that the rate at which the coronavirus pandemic is going is quite alarming. The rate at which the virus is going is quite alarming. So presently, the statistics says the coronavirus is about 530 deaths as it is. So yeah, so these are some of the points in which you want to consider when you look at the pandemics of the world. Now, how is it related to us? How do we make sense of this? We still want to look at it again from the realists and the liberalists view on pandemics. Remember we said realism believe that humans are intrinsically evil and that states behaves like humans. We said humans are evil, humans are competitive, and conflict is the order of the day. So you see, the realists believe that they are evil, and then they believe that the biggest actor in the international system is the state. And for them, they believe that the state is concerned about its own security. And because the state is concerned about its own security, the state will do everything in its power to protect itself. The state will do everything in its power to protect itself. This argument is also what the realist is saying about humans, that humans are evil, humans are selfish. They will do everything to protect themselves. They will do everything to take care of themselves. That is how the state too is. The state is concerned about security and it will do everything to protect its own interests. And if the interest of the state is survival, then the first thing the state will look at is what? Preservation. The state will want to preserve himself as compared to in relation to what is happening. So if the state wants to preserve itself, there's no issue about morality. You cannot be concerned about morality. You cannot be concerned with what is right or what is wrong. Like I said, the state will do anything in its power to protect itself. So the realists believe that everything the state will do will be to his own interest. It will be to his own interest. And the implication is, for instance, when you look at the issue of the lockdown, for instance, it was to the state interest. The state felt, okay, the first thing we need to do is to close our borders and not relate with anybody. Irrespective of who is going to be hurt, I need to first protect myself. So let's close our borders and the like. So you see, there was the closure of borders. That is that's realist thinking. Seeing the situation, not saying, okay, Lesotho is our brothers, Lesotho will be hungry, so let's Lesotho to come to South Africa. No, close our border. Nobody should come anywhere. Everybody stay in your space. That's a realist thinking. Now, when it comes to competition, as the order of the day, you realize that there's already conspiracy theories going around to say that this disease, coronavirus, was created by China because China wants to become the world power. So China wants to kill people and then take over the economies of the world and all that. That conspiracy theory is coming from a realist thinking. The premise being that it is possible that these things are biological weapons that were created to gain comparative advantage in the world. It is possible. It's a conspiracy theory, but yes, it is possible. That is a realist thinking. To say you are looking at it from the premise of competition, seeing that might be a possibility. It is also realist thinking to talk about competition, to say, okay, instead of people cooperating to find a way of eliminating the virus, everybody is trying to be the first. Everybody wants to be the leader in the fight against the virus. USA wants to be the leader. China wants to be the leader. Europe, the countries in Europe also want to be the one spearheading. So everybody wants to be the one spearheading. That is competition. When it comes to coming up with vaccine for the virus, each country wants to be the first to produce the vaccine. Why are they concerned about being the first to produce the vaccine? Because anybody that first produces the vaccine has the market. And when you have the market, you make more profits. So you see, they're not concerned about the people that are dying per se, but they are concerned about the profit they will make from it. And then that also speaks to the struggle for power. Whoever between the USA and China that spearheads this campaign most probably will become the world power over time. So you see, that's a struggle in itself. That is why, and it also speaks to the conspiracy theory that China created this virus to become world power. All these things are within the premises of the realist view on pandemic. So they believe that for the realists, the most important is that when there is a pandemic, the state needs to protect itself. And the state must do everything within its power to ensure the protection of itself. So if it needs to close its border, it should close its border. Not minding who dies, not minding what happens, it should close its border. Another realist view, of which I did not write here, is to say that it is possible for us to argue and say everybody that has contracted the virus should be killed. They can just gather everybody that has contracted the virus and kill them. Once they kill everybody that contracted the virus will die. It is also like flattening the curve, bringing everybody that contract the virus, because we say once you contract the virus, you stand the chance of transmitting the virus to another person. So what do we do? And there's no cure for the virus. So instead of keeping you, what do? We kill you. That's a realist thinking. It's a realist thinking. Is it right? No. Is it morally right? No. But is it right when it comes to survival? Yes. So under realism, we are not concerned about what is morally right, what is good, morally good, or what is morally bad. What we are concerned about is what is our survival. So the state will do everything to ensure we survive. When it comes to South Africa, for instance, we talk about lockdown. Everybody should stay in his spaces. Nobody should go out. What will happen if there's a lockdown? If there's a continuous lockdown and people are not allowed to go out to work, or go out to fend for themselves, to find food for themselves, people will die of hunger. A lot of people will die of hunger. People will lose their jobs. But what happens? The state will be protected. So under realism, we are going to argue that everybody stay in your house. Even if you like, you should die in your house. You would rather die in your house than you transmit the disease. That is realist thinking. So these are some of the things you want to look at. It is not looking at it from a moral perspective. It's looking at it from what it is. That's why we say under realism, we look at issues as they are, not as they should be. So you look at it as they are. Should we ensure that the state survive? Or should we ensure that the people, some set of the people survive? Whose interest should we take care of? Another realism will also be asking ourselves, should the state pay for our sustenance, or should we fend for ourselves? If the state can provide, yes. But if not, the state will say, go and take care of yourself. Do whatever you need to do. But we are going to what? Protect the state. So that's the argument of the realists when it comes to pandemic. Now, when it comes to the liberals are almost always the almost opposite of realism. Not obviously opposite, but most of the argument of realism is the opposite argument in which liberalism talk about. While realism said that humans are evil and they are competitive, liberalism argued that yes, it is true. Humans can have evil, they can be evil in nature. They may be evil in nature, but they can also cooperate. They can actually cooperate. Cooperation is still possible. And for us to solve the pandemic, for us to be able to survive this pandemic, then cooperation is the order of the day. We have to cooperate. States must come together. States must not isolate themselves. They must come together. So there should not be an issue of, say, lockdown and the issue of closure of borders and all that, or the issue of competition of who does this and who does. Who does this and who does that does not matter. What matters is that we should cooperate, gather our resources together, and fight the particular pandemic together. So in these spaces, we're talking about a united front, unity to confront the problem. So basically, that's the argument of realism. So, liberalism. For liberalism, there's a need for unity. There's a need to be concerned about the people. The people, we need to be concerned about the people, not just the state alone. We need to be concerned about one another. So every action and inaction in which we are going to take concerning the pandemic, it must be all-encompassing. It must be that we carry everybody along. We must ensure that things are done together. So basically, this is an argument of liberalism. So in liberalism, things should be done together. Things should be done in the united front. Cooperation is possible. The people should the security of the people, security of individuals should also be seen. And under liberalism, it also argues that it is not just the state alone that is an actor, but there are also non-state actors. There are people, there are individuals, there are organizations that needs to be involved in the fight against pandemics. Under realism, they say the state is the major actor. The states are the ones involved. Under liberalism, we say no, not the state alone. The people are also involved. Individuals are also involved. These people are referred to as non-state actors. Organizations are also involved. Governmental and non-governmental organizations are also involved. So basically, these are the arguments of the liberals. So like the question I gave you for your assignment. So the question we'll be asking ourselves is, seeing what the liberals discuss as what we need to do to stop this virus, and what the realists are saying as what we need to do to stop this virus, which path will you advise the government to follow? Should we follow the liberal path? Should we cooperate with others? Or should we go by the realist path to say, let's do the drastic step. Let's not be concerned about morality. but let's be concerned about the survival of the state. So which path will you advise the South African government to go by in order for us to reduce this the issue of the coronavirus? Which path should we go? Consider the fact that yesterday, for instance, yesterday, which was the 5th of July, I was reading in the news where they said about 10,000 cases, new cases of coronavirus was recorded in South Africa yesterday alone, which implies that there's been an increase in coronavirus cases. And the increase in coronavirus cases started after the easing of the lockdown, because the South African government have been able to flatten the curve during the lockdown. So the infection rate was reduced. But after the lockdown, there has been a continuous increase in the number of infections in South Africa. That as of yesterday, about 10,000 new cases were recorded. So, seeing the reality of how coronavirus is going in South Africa, what path will you advise the government to follow? Is it the realist path, or is it the liberalist path? So it's a point for you to think about, and just keep thinking about it and come up with policy solution. Write something about it, and you can share whatever you have about it. So yeah, that will be the end of the lecture on the human security part 2. So with that, I will say this is the end of the lecture itself of the geopolitics class. The next time we'll be contacting is going to be for us to do revisions on our tests, as well as the period in which we'll be having the test. If you have any question, you can contact me via my contacts, my email address, most preferably, and then we can talk about any question you have. Thank you very much. So that will be the end of the class.